Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second WIP SmackDown, Developer SmackDown. Today we're joined by Torben Primke from Jelly and Eric Hellman, Android developer, author, and works at Spotify. He's over in Stockholm. Torben is coming to us from San Francisco, and I'm Carlo Longino. I'm Vice President of WIP, and I'm down in Austin, Texas. For those of you that haven't joined us before, today we'll be discussing the developer toolkit and hearing from Torben and Eric about development tools that they use, what's in their toolbox, how they choose tools, and things like that. You, of course, have the opportunity to ask questions. We'll take questions over Twitter. So if you want to ask a question, just tweet it with the hashtag WIPSmackDown. Also like to give some thanks to Samsung for helping put on these SmackDowns. They've got their Samsung Developer Conference coming up next week in San Francisco. If you'd like to join, visit samsungdevcon.com, and you can use the code SDCWIP to get a $200 discount on registration. Just a reminder that we've got a couple giveaways courtesy of Samsung today as well. We've got one that we'll announce at the end of our broadcast here for a winner from people who registered ahead of time, and then again we'll give out a device to our favorite question that gets answered via Twitter using that WIP SmackDown hashtag. So be sure to get your question in for that. So without any further ado, Eric, I'll pass things over to you and let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then maybe if you could quickly just walk us through sort of what is your core developer toolkit, the tools that you rely on the most, and then we'll compare with what Torben has to say and go from there. So Eric, welcome. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Eric. I live in Sweden. I've been living here for all my life, so I'm Swedish. Currently working at Spotify, and before I've been working here for almost a year, and before that I was one of the lead engineers in, or architects as they call it there, at Sony Mobile. I'm also the author of this book, and now I got that plug. So that's shortly about me. So a little bit about how I work. So I'm an Android developer. I work mostly with writing code for the Android apps, but before I also worked a lot with the Android platform. So of course I use the regular tools that are state of the art now. Android Studio. I use a lot of Gradle and all these things that we're all familiar with. I also strongly recommend people to switch to these tools as soon as possible, even if some people still prefer Eclipse. I actually recommend people to just learn Android Studio for this simple reason that that's what's going to be used in the future. But there is also, we also do a lot of coding not in Java itself, so there are need for tools for native development in C and C++. And that is more trickier because everyone seems to be doing their own thing there. So some people use CMake, so I have to learn CMake, and some use regular makefiles, and some use the Android NDK build system, which basically also is regular makefiles, but yeah, CMake. Sorry, not mate. Yeah, so that's so if you're doing native development, it's still worth checking out both CMake and the NDK properly. Yeah, and for emulator purpose, I actually use Genymotion because the nice people from Genymotion gave me a free personal license. So I like to use that one when I can't run on a physical device, or when it's not too slow to run on a physical device at the moment. So yeah, that's basically my base toolkit for doing Android stuff. And this changes and grows over time. I use a lot of third-party libraries, too many to list here. And it depends on the situation. There are in some specific cases there are tools that come to mind. I'm thinking about the graphics debugging from Qualcomm for OpenGL debugging and stuff like that, but I rarely use them unless there is something very special I do. Yeah, I guess it sums it up pretty good.
Great, thanks, Eric. Torben, I'll throw it over to you. Same question. You'd just like to introduce yourself and then walk us through your core tools. We lost Torben.
Oops.
Sounds like we've lost Torben.
I think so. Unfortunate.
Well, hopefully he can rejoin us. So Eric, I'll get to pick on you a little bit. You talked about working with Android Studio instead of Eclipse or another IDE. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about?
I can go ahead.
Oh, did we get him back?
Torben back. Torben's back.
Still no video from Torben. Can you hear us? There you go. Hey, Torben.
I can hear you.
Great. I don't know if you caught my question, but if you could, I basically throw the same thing over to you. If you could just introduce yourself and then walk us through your tools, that'd be great.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so my name is Torben Primke. I work at Jelly. Earlier this year we released, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but we released a question and answer application. We're working on something else now. Before Jelly, I was at Facebook. I worked on the Messenger application as well as search. And prior to Facebook, I worked at Goala on their location-based application. That's pretty much about my background in Android. I started working on Android in 2011, and back then started with IntelliJ, used it throughout working at Facebook, and then since working at Jelly, transitioned over to actually using Android Studio as well. Same as Eric, I use Genymotion now whenever possible, whenever I need to run something in the emulator. Prior to that, I was really just developing on actual hardware devices all the time. The emulator was simply too slow for my workflow. Those are the two tools I use primarily. Obviously, Gradle for building. The new Gradle dependency system is excellent. More and more of the open source libraries also switching to that, so it makes it really easy to try something else out, plug it in, play with it. If it doesn't work, take it back out. No need to copy additional jars and stuff into your lib folder. So that's as far as the tools. Carlo, do you want me also go into some of the libraries I use?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. So, well, at Facebook, I wasn't really using many libraries, but since then, and like a little before I left, I started looking what's out there. And so now, what I primarily use for dependency injection, I use a Dagon Mortar. Dependency injection, that's something that we used very much at Facebook as well. And kind of got used to it. It's really nice for testing as well as just keeping your code clean overall. For views, I now use the butter knife for view injection. It makes you, not have to repeat all the find view by ID lines in your view file, in your UI code. For networking, I use or networking and API stuff. I use the OK HTTP and Retrofit. For images, I was using Picasso, but then switched over to Glide now. I just found a few things nice about it. Animations, I use Rebound. It's super nice for making anything smooth in the UI. Database, I use Sprinkles. I didn't really look too much around as what was out there beside it, but it works quite well, and not really looking to switch. For logging, we used a few different ones, but the one that I like the most now is Localytics. Also something that I like to do for things like logging, we tried out Flurry, Android mobile, Amazon Mobile Analytics was to really like have an abstract, have an interface. And with the dependency injection, I was easily plug into a different one. So that was always good. If you're trying out different services, try to like not put it all the way into your code, but have it nicely abstracted so that you can pull it out very easy and swap out for something better that either comes along at a later point, or maybe that discover it's just a better tool. For crashes, we use Crashalytics. I find it excellent. Gives you real good information about what's going on with your app out there. And then for bug reporting, I was using my own thing. Shake the phone, take a screenshot. But recently discovered Instabug, and most likely, going to switch for that. So those are like I think most high-level libraries that I use, and like any application I would work on.
Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 types of libraries. I think you mentioned. Seems like quite a bit to keep track of. But a few things you mentioned that I wanted to follow up on. Both of you said that you're now using Android Studio. Torben, in your case, you switched over from IntelliJ. Eric, you talked a little bit about your choice to use that as the IDE. Could you maybe explain that a little more? What you think the benefits of using the Android Studio as opposed to some other IDEs is?
Well, for all developers, it's I never heard anyone complain about the Android Studio is based on IntelliJ. For those who didn't know that, but I never heard a developer complain about IntelliJ really, as compared to Eclipse. So I guess that's actually the main reason. Eclipse is an editor where you have to go take coffee when you open an XML file. So it's that's reason enough to just drop it. But to be more fair, it's also the thing that it is the IDE that Google is working on for the Android platform, which makes it like reason enough to just pick that one instead of trying to stick to something old. You can of course do that, but it will just make life harder for you if you choose to do something different.
Okay. And Torben, you were using IntelliJ before. It was just the fact that when Android Studio came out with basically being built on IntelliJ, is that why you switched?
I didn't switch right away because at Facebook we actually use a different build system. So Android Studio has nice integration with Gradle, the build system, also supported by Google. And we were using a different system there called Bug. It was an in-house thing. It's open source, but it was a little different as far as like building there. We were building on the command line versus out of the IDE, and so, but like now I work on a much smaller application, and so I mean Android Studio with Gradle integration is just the way to go. And yes, it's pretty much the same if you used IntelliJ before. It's like same shortcuts. I think one of the like best things or something for me about IntelliJ or Android Studio is like the ease of refactoring your code. Extracting code into methods, renaming classes, moving things around. It's just really easy once you get down, like once you remember all the different shortcuts. So.
We've got a couple questions that have come in already. From @Keithar Collins, he'd like to know the advantages of moving from Eclipse to Android Studio, which I think we've covered a little bit. But specifically, he says he uses Eclipse today, but he needs a better debugging tool. Can you offer any, either of you offer any insight on using debugging tools perhaps with Android Studio?
Yeah.
Over Eclipse?
Yeah, well, the debugger in Android Studio is far more superior than the one in Eclipse today. You can set conditional breakpoints, you can evaluate code live and stuff like that. It's pretty awesome, and I keep getting amazed of things that features in the debugger in Android Studio that I didn't know existed. I learn of, so, and I've been using IntelliJ for a very long time, so.
Okay, great. Both of you also mentioned using the Genymotion emulator. What is it that makes that one superior that you guys like? And then I've got a follow-up question after that related to a similar topic. Torben, you want to tell us about that?
Sure. I think it's mainly speed for me. It's not as resource intensive as the Android emulators were. They did some speed improvements by using like x86, and that sped up those emulators up a bit, but I don't think it comes close. I haven't tried them lately, but at least when I tried them last time, they didn't come close to the speed of Genymotion and the limited or like the low amount of resources memory that it actually needed. So if you would fire up the emulator, the standard Android emulator, it would spin up your fan. You could go wait until it's actually booted, like get a copy while the main advantage. So
yeah. Anything to add to that, Eric?
Yeah, it might be interesting to know that technically the Android emulator that comes with the SDK builds on a very resource-intensive emulator called QEMU, but while the Genymotion builds on VirtualBox, which is also just for x86, so you're actually running Android on x86. So if your code is only for ARM-based, you can't use Genymotion, unfortunately. That said, there are ways to speed up the default emulator in the Android SDK. It requires some low-level kernel hacking, basically. So,
okay. What I wanted to follow that up with, Torben, you had mentioned that you do a lot of your instead of using the emulator, you would do a lot of on-device testing. Something that we've seen a lot of different companies try and bring solutions for are these remote device testing services. You get a lot of device makers that will give you access to actual devices of theirs sitting in a building somewhere that you can access online. Are you using any sort of those services at all? Do you find those useful or valuable?
I've used them a long time ago. Haven't used them recently. We were actually just discussing something like that yesterday as we're going into testing for the new update we're working on. But I don't really have any input around that right now.
Okay. Eric, anything to add there? I think one of your former employers might have something like that.
Yes, we also had that, and I also read recently that Google is one company they bought some time ago. They're gonna do something with that as well. So similar thing there. I don't know. I've never really seen the benefit there. If you're developing for Android and you have device-specific problem, I think it's actually easier to let the user discover it. Because they're usually very, very weird corner cases.
Mm-hmm.
You develop for Android and stick to the vanilla Android, then you cover 95% of it, and then there's like the device-specific bugs, but it's not guaranteed that you will notice this yourself anyway. With this kind of remote labs thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, just because for so long the big beef with developing for Android was fragmentation. So has that really become less of a problem now?
Yeah, definitely. For two reasons. The vendors have learned not to mess with the platform, or rather, they do it less. If you ask someone working on the Android platform at Google, I guess they will still say that it still happens, but it is much better. I also know this since I worked at a device manufacturer. It just costs too much to modify the platform when you're going to roll out an upgrade. The other reason is that Google launched the support libraries, which kind of can take care of these peculiar things in each various Android version and weird bugs in certain device manufacturers' code.
Okay, great. Another question. Torben, you certainly mentioned, describing your libraries, a number of different pieces coming from a number of different libraries and providers and things like that. The first question about that was a simple one. Someone said, "What library did you say you used for database?" And that was one called Sprinkles. And we'll send out links to some things like that after we finish up. So don't worry about that. But then Subash Twit had a question. What do you think of the newly released Twitter SDK? So I'm not sure how much of a look you've taken at that, but I guess specifically, what do you think of that SDK, and then also in general, do SDKs like that roll a lot of different functionality into one tool or one SDK appeal to you more than using these sort of a little from here, a little from there, a little from here, or is that not a concern for you?
Yeah.
Torben, go ahead. Eric, we'll come back to you. No problem.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I've implemented the Twitter sign-up with Twitter4j, but I have looked at the Twitter SDK. I just haven't pulled out the old code to replace it. In general, I prefer a library like for Twitter or Facebook, like single sign-on, over something that's like just created on. I think as when you can actually leverage the native the app that's already installed on your phone versus going through the browser. So I'm going to replace it eventually, and it looked fine. I just need to make sure. I think that you could like not drop their button in, but actually use your own button and then just make the same auth calls. But in general, I prefer that like to come from the actual company over like the open source one. But like something that's not available, so then you have to work around that. To address your second question, do I prefer like?
Torben, I think we've lost you again.
Like the Twitter SDK over like the long list of things that I listed. I don't think there's a like. Let's start over.
Yeah, if you could, please.
Okay, I'll talk about the second part. So, do I prefer the Twitter SDK over like the long list of things I listed? I don't think there's a way to compare the two, because Twitter SDK is very specifically for things to integrate with the Twitter platform, versus those libraries I listed all serve a specific purpose. Now, would it be nice if they all came in one? Yes, but having different people work on different solutions, for example, around like loading images, there's Glide, Picasso, Volley. All of them like slightly different, and some people prefer one thing over another. So I don't think it's too hard to like figure out what to use. Like it's nice maybe to have like an ideal toolbox to start with, but like over time you'll find like things that you like more versus others, and so you're going to switch them out. Also, there's a website I use now called Android Arsenal. People
Android Arsenal? Okay. Sorry. That was Android Arsenal, Torben?
Yeah, it's called Android Arsenal, and it's basically like a page that lists all the different libraries that are out there. It's kind of overwhelming when you go there, because you don't like, for example, you look for like a specific list view, and you don't really know which of the 10 to pick. So I think what would make it easier, like going forward, is that there's more feedback or talking around, discussing those different libraries, so new people can actually figure out which ones are good, which ones are bad, and maybe which ones haven't been maintained in a long time. But other than that, like just having one place like the Android Arsenal website now, where you can actually like go as a first step to try to find a library that will, solve what the problem that you're
Okay, Eric, I think you had some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so this is the eternal question if you should roll your own stuff, or you should use some third-party service, because this is online service, web services that you access in some way. If it's for login or account creation, push notification, whatever. There are so many. And I mean, now we have Twitter has come up with their own thing. I haven't looked into the details. I can't say what it contains really. But my guess is that it will be pretty similar to what Facebook does with parse and what Google does with play services, etc., etc. And you should pick one of these. You should. It's like you will always be afraid that you will like tie into a platform that you can't get out of later, or you will lose something in the long run, or it will cost or whatever. But this is the risk we have to take, because the alternative of rolling it all on your own, it's not. It's worse. Mm-hmm. It will just take time, and it's not worth the money. So go for what your gut feeling sort of tells you. And if you're writing an Android-only app, I would definitely just go for the Google equivalent here. If you're going cross-platform, then both Facebook and Twitter is probably good.
Okay, great. A few more questions have come in from @Albert BNTZ. Can you recommend any tool with real-time resizable screens to see how your application responds to different screen sizes? Either one of you have any suggestions on that, a tool to see how different screen sizes affect your app?
Actually, there is one. The designer in Android Studio gives a rather nice feedback on as it is today. It's not perfect, but it's a good start if you want to check it out. Mm-hmm. Also, what I noticed is once you learn how the different layouts and stuff work in Android, you kind of get a feel in advance for how it will look on smaller screens and such. You kind of pick that one up. So eventually, when you've done UI enough, you feel like, okay, it's fine. I will do it for the Nexus 4 or Nexus 5, and then I actually know what the problems will be on larger and smaller screens.
Mm-hmm. So. Okay. I think we've lost Torben again, so I'm going to throw this one back to you again, Eric. From Jordi Zhao, XOU, I'm not sure quite how to pronounce that. Now that fragmentation is not as problematic as it used to be, what's the hardest problem you're finding now with Android?
I actually did a presentation at DroidCon in London about one of the things. It's exactly as it is. The fragmentation is not so much of an issue. Now the real problems, bugs in the platform starts appearing. And one of these that I discovered is called the application termination bug. I can give you a link to my presentation later, and people can have a look at it.
Great.
So there are a number of platform stuff that can be quite severe and hard to solve, because they can appear on all platforms. You can't really identify it very easily. I think that will become more problematic, but the good thing is it's more manageable because we have the source code in an Android open source project. So yeah, that's one of the problems I have. Yeah, that's for me at least.
Okay. Torben, I think you're back. What's the biggest problem you're facing with Android these days?
Yeah, as Eric mentioned, like there's not so much a fragmentation anymore, but I still find sometimes very specific bugs that come up because of some modifications on certain devices. Even like we only support 4.0 and higher now, but there were some weird things that happen on like, I don't know, some ATT devices versus some Samsung devices, and so those things I think still sometimes problematic. Besides that, I don't really see too many problems. More into contact to different devices, but other than that, like, I mean, Android has come a long way, and I mean, it's pretty easy at this point, or pretty straightforward, I would say.
Okay, great. So we're coming close to the end of our session. A couple more questions just to go through really quickly. So just a couple word answers on these would be great. First, how long do you think Eclipse will last? How long will it stick around? Any guesses out there, guys?
it has survived beyond what I would have expected from the beginning. So I'll guess it will stay there. It's like all of this old stuff. I mean, we'll probably find people writing Java code for enterprise in Eclipse 10 years from now.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's probably going to be around for some time just because it's not just used for Android development. So, and other people have invested a lot of resources into Eclipse. So.
Yeah. Okay. And then last question: Samsung uses the Tizen OS for wearables. Do you think they'll soon be releasing their own separate OS for phones and tablets?
Yeah, but wasn't this like we had talked the same thing about Migo or Maimo? I don't know. They keep getting different names. They're basically based on the same thing. They're all, not technically speaking maybe, but they're all operator-driven, operator and vendor-driven OSs that are, even though there are open source per se, they are just fully controlled by like this organization that we really don't trust very much, and they're not very good at creating app ecosystems. So no, I don't believe so.
Okay.
It will be hard, but I mean, it will be hard to push another OS in there that developers have to learn and then get ready and build stuff for versus leveraging what's already out there. I mean, especially since all the devices are Android, I think, for the most part. And also, didn't they try some other like C-based operating system maybe like 2 or 3 years ago?
I think there's been more than one.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Torben and Eric, for joining us today and sharing some of your experience and expertise. We do have a couple of winners to announce of some Samsung Gear smartwatches. Our first winner from the emails from people that registered is Christelle Scharf. So congratulations, Christelle. You'll hear from us over email. And then from our Twitter questions, our winner is at Keith R. Collins. So Keith, be sure and follow the at WhipJam account so we can send you a direct message and get in touch with you about your prize. So once again, thank you, Torben, for joining us from San Francisco. Eric, thanks for joining us from Stockholm. And that's it from me, Carlo from WIP. Stay tuned for details of our next WIP Developer Smackdown, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.